A rainy night and a stranger's secret. He thought it was just another rainy night, another quiet visit to the diner. But when a mysterious woman walked in, drenched, lost, completely out of place, his life took a turn he never expected. A simple act of kindness led to something deeper. But what happens when the truth comes out? When secrets unravel and identities are revealed, will their connection survive? Or was it all just an illusion? Rain poured down heavily, soaking the streets and blurring the neon reflections on the pavement. The small diner on the corner stood out like a warm beacon in the cold, wet night. Inside, the lights glowed softly, the air filled with the rich aroma of coffee and the gentle hum of an old jukebox tune. It was a quiet night. A few regulars sat in their usual spots, stirring sugar into their cups, flipping through newspapers, or simply watching the rain streak down the windows. At the counter, John sat with his hands wrapped around a steaming mug of coffee. Another long day at the garage. His hands were rough. His clothes carried the scent of grease and motor oil, and exhaustion weighed heavy on his shoulders. But this diner was his escape, his one place to let the world slow down. Then the door swung open with a chime. A woman rushed in, soaked to the bone, water dripping from her coat, her damp hair clinging to her face. She hesitated for a moment, scanning the room, her gaze darting to the windows like she was expecting someone, or maybe hiding from someone. Then she slipped into a corner booth, tucking herself into the shadows. John noticed everything. She didn't look like someone who belonged in a small-town diner. Her coat was expensive, her boots polished and sleek, and there was a certain grace to the way she moved, like someone used to finer places. But what truly caught his attention was the look on her face. She wasn't just cold or tired. She looked worried, like she was carrying a weight far heavier than the rain-soaked fabric clinging to her skin. The waitress approached her with a menu. John turned his focus back to his coffee, trying not to stare. But he couldn't help overhearing their conversation a few minutes later. I think I forgot my wallet, the woman said softly, her voice tinged with embarrassment. She rummaged through her bag, her fingers trembling slightly. I'm so sorry. I didn't realize. The waitress gave her a kind smile, but John could see the woman's cheeks flush with humiliation as she kept searching, hoping, praying she'd find something. He made a decision. Setting his coffee down, he motioned out to the waitress, pulling a few crumpled bills from his pocket. I'll cover it, he said simply. The waitress hesitated. You sure? Yeah, he nodded. It's not a big deal. The woman looked up, startled. Oh no, please, she said quickly. You don't have to do that. It's fine, John replied, offering her a small, easy smile. Everyone forgets things sometimes. She hesitated, then smiled back. A small, grateful smile that for the briefest moment lit up her face. Thank you, she whispered. John shrugged and turned back to his coffee, not wanting to make a big deal out of it. Helping people came naturally to him, and he wasn't looking for recognition, but something told him. This woman wasn't just anyone, and tonight wasn't just another rainy night. It was the beginning of something more. John never thought a simple act of kindness would change his life. It was just another rainy night, just another visit to the diner. But when she walked in, drenched, lost, completely out of place, he never expected their past to intertwine the way they did, and he certainly never expected her secret. The woman finished her meal quietly, occasionally glancing toward John. When she was done, she stood up and walked over to him. Thanks again, she said, pulling a napkin from the dispenser. With a pen from her purse, she scribbled something down and placed it in front of him. Here's my number. I'd like to repay you somehow. John looked at the napkin, surprised. That's not necessary, he said honestly. It was just a meal. Maybe, she replied, her smile growing a little shy. But it meant more than you know. Call me sometime. And with that, she turned, stepping out into the pouring rain. The bell above the door jingled softly behind her. John picked up the napkin. Natasha, followed by her number. He smiled to himself, wondering who she really was and why their brief encounter felt so significant. Falling, but into what? In the weeks that followed, John and Natasha grew closer. It started with a phone call, then a coffee date, and then before they knew it, they were meeting regularly. Natasha was warm, kind, easy to talk to. She laughed at his jokes, listened to his stories, and made him feel seen in a way he hadn't in years. John found himself opening up to her, sharing things he rarely talked about, His long hours at the garage, his struggles with money, his dream of one day owning his own shop. And Natasha listened, truly listened, encouraging him at every turn. She shared pieces of herself too. Her love for art, her passion for helping others. But she was careful not to reveal too much. She told him she worked in business but avoided details. For the first time in a long time, she felt free. Someone who cared for her, not for her status or her money, but for who she was. Because Natasha wasn't just any woman. She was a billionaire CEO, one of the most powerful women in the industry. Her name often splashed across business magazines and news articles. She had spent years being treated differently because of her wealth, and she was terrified that if John knew, everything between them would change. She didn't want to be seen. As the billionaire, she just wanted to be Natasha, the woman he met on a rainy night in a small-town diner. The truth unfolds. One afternoon, John decided to surprise her. He stopped by her apartment, coffee in hand, excitement buzzing in his chest. There, door was slightly open. "Natasha?" he called, stepping inside. Then he froze. The apartment was massive, filled with expensive furniture, abstract paintings, sculptures that looked like they belonged in a museum. And on the coffee table, a glossy magazine sat open. John's stomach dropped because staring back at him was Natasha's face on the cover. The headline read, "Natasha Clean, the billionaire CEO changing the game." His heart pounded in his chest. She had been lying to him. The woman he had been falling for, the one who had encouraged him, listened to his dreams, shared quiet moments over coffee, had been hiding who she really was. Footsteps. John turned to see Natasha standing in the doorway. Her face went pale when she saw what he was holding. "John," she said softly, guilt in her eyes. "I can explain." John's grip on the magazine tightened. "Explain what?" he said, voice low. "That you've been lying to me this whole time?" "I wasn't lying," Natasha said quickly. I didn't want my money to get in the way. I was afraid you'd see me differently." John let out a bitter laugh. "You didn't trust me," he said. "You thought I'd care more about your money than about you." That's not it," she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. "I just wanted us to feel real." "I didn't know how to tell you." John shook his head, emotions twisting inside him. "I thought I knew you, Natasha, but now I'm not so sure," he said. The magazine down and walked out, leaving her standing there, tears streaming down her face. A letter, a second chance for days. John couldn't stop thinking about her. He felt betrayed, but he also missed her terribly. Then one evening, he found a letter in his mailbox. It was from Natasha. In it, she poured out her heart. She wrote about how lonely her life had been, how she had spent years being judged for her wealth, how she had fallen in love with him because he saw her for who she was, not what she had. "I just hope you can forgive me." John read the letter over and over, and he realized Natasha had been scared, just like he was. Maybe they both needed to let go of their fears. A love worth fighting for. A few nights later, Natasha was hosting a gala. John showed up. He borrowed a suit from a friend, swallowed his pride, and stepped into the grand hall. The chandeliers sparkled overhead. The crowd was full of powerful, elegant people. But John only saw her, standing alone, looking distant and sad. He took a deep breath and walked up to her. "Natasha," he said. She turned, eyes widening in surprise. "John," she whispered. "I've been thinking," he said. "I was angry, but I realized I wasn't fair to you either. I let my pride get in the way." She stared at him, tears brimming. "I don't care about your money," John continued. "I care about you." A single tear slipped down her cheek. "You mean that?" she asked. "Yes," John said. "I just want us to start fresh, no secrets." Natasha smiled through her tears and threw her arms around him. "You were always enough for me," she whispered. "I was just too scared to believe it." And just like that, they found their way back to each other. Not as a mechanic and a billionaire, but simply as John and Natasha. Two people who had finally learned to trust and love. And that was more valuable than anything money could buy.